Aloha and welcome to UHERO Focus. I'm Colin Moore and I'm joined by my colleagues at UHERO, Stephen Bond-Smith, Leah Bremer, and Kimberly Burnett, as well as Clay Trauernicht, who's a UHERO Fellow and Extension Faculty in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management at UH Manoa, where he specializes in wildfire and ecosystem care. We're here to talk about the new thought piece on the UHERO website, Reducing Fire Risk and Restoring Value to Fallow Agricultural Lands. Now, each of you has a unique area of expertise, so I'm curious what motivated this piece. Stephen, how did it all come together?
So I'm involved in a lot of conversations about diversifying our economy, including supporting agriculture. But there are very few sort of strong arguments in economics for picking one industry over another. Why pick industry over anything else? Why pick agriculture over anything else? So at our last Pauhana, Leah brought up how agriculture provides ecosystem services, including reducing wildfire risk. And so my thought was that by focusing on ecosystem services, that's a way of supporting agriculture and reducing fire risk without just directly supporting a single industry or picking a single industry.
So at this point, I think many of us understand that a major cause of the Maui fires was the amount of flammable and unmanaged non-native grasslands on former plantations. We have a figure up here that shows you how many communities in Hawaii are at risk of devastating wildfires. And so many of these are surrounded by former agricultural lands. I was shocked to learn that these fallow agricultural lands now comprise about 25% of all land across the state. Leah, how can we start addressing this problem?
Yeah, so this piece was an effort among our team just to start the conversation about this dire risk that these unmanaged grasslands pose to human safety, cultural heritage, and environmental quality. And the Maui fires really highlighted this, but it's been a problem for many, many years. And so it's something we absolutely need to do something about right away. You can kind of think about it as a ticking time bomb that we need to address for so many reasons. But at the same time, while it's this huge crisis and a challenge, we also have this incredible opportunity to support restoring broader social value to these lands. So we can support farmers, ranchers, communities in taking care of these lands in a way that can reduce fire risk, but can also provide broad ecosystem services or societal benefits like reducing sediment to coral reefs that are so important for fisheries and tourism. We can produce indigenous and other culturally relevant foods. We can even increase the aesthetic beauty of these lands and just overall improve the quality of life in Hawaii, including our economy.
Great. Clay, let me turn to you. What's the best way to start managing these grasslands?
There's lots of options, which is kind of the cool thing about fire in the context of these lands that we're talking about, which you're looking at about 1 million acres statewide. So it's a big task, but it opens up lots of opportunities. And so kind of starting from the basics would just be, putting in fire breaks and fuel breaks. Mm-hmm. But really when you talk about caring for these lands in a different way, that can range from sort of grazing and ranching as kind of a really good short-term option there to sort of quickly reduce those fuels. And then looking towards longer-term systems that actually transform the fuel type that's there. Obviously, reforestation, restoration is on the table, but our agriculture also provides a really, again, multi-benefit, multi-use way to change the fuel condition on the land, provide all these other benefits we're talking about, and really reduce risk. I mean, when you think about the other options, it's kind of like a tier where the degree to which you transform the fuels that are out there ready to burn is really a measure of the degree to which the fire risk will be reduced.
Sure. Leah, do you want to weigh in on this too? How does transforming some of these lands back to agriculture help solve the problem?
Yeah, so in addition to what Clay said, and this is something we've talked a lot about and heard from ranchers and farmers and others, in addition to reducing the fuel load, agriculture also means more, quote unquote, boots on the ground. So people there that can alert first, raise the flag that there's a fire and then also help to fight the fire. And for example, in the Kula fires, paniolos were a big part of helping to prevent further spread of that fire. So that's a big piece of this. But, a big challenge is there's huge financial and structural obstacles to agriculture right now that, include, the cost of transitioning lands, but also things like land tenure and access. So if we want to be serious about restoring broad social value to these lands, we need to come up with ways to reduce those obstacles.
Sure, and on that issue of cost, Kim, let me ask you. I mean, this sounds promising but expensive. So how do we pay for it?
Right. Well, so if we think about this in terms of ecosystem services, right, fire is actually an ecosystem disservice where these grassy, unmanaged lands are providing increased fire risk, threatening lives and property. So from an economic perspective, then we should be able to justify thinking about, incentives for better land care, right? And also disincentives for not taking care of the land. So we need to think about a combination of carrots and sticks where we're incentivizing, increasing ecosystem services and then penalizing when you're not taking care of the land and you're increasing those fire risks. And so the good news is that on the books already, we already have a lot of codes in the county fire codes that actually, specify if we are not taking care of these lands, if we're letting the vegetation, pose increased fire risk, then landowners can actually be held accountable for that. And there are fines. There are schedules of fines in the county codes. The problem is we haven't been enforcing those. And so landowners basically don't have the right set of incentives to transition away from these unmanaged grassy ag lands into something that could increase, ecosystem services, cultural benefits, food benefits, agriculture, agroforestry, and all of these other things. So working on those incentives and getting the incentive structure right is kind of, I think, a big first step.
Thanks, Kim. But Stephen, at the end of the day, what do you hope the community will take from this piece?
Look, I think of this piece and this conversation that we're having not just as a way of supporting, highlighting the need to support ecosystem services, but a way of bringing the people who are talking about reviving agriculture or talking about diversifying our economy and bringing them into this conversation about environmental policy. So economic growth is often seen as something that conflicts with supporting our environment or protecting our environment. But when we have an industry that provides ecosystem services, we have a community that really cares about its environment, and we have a bunch of industries that really depend on the ecosystem services that our scenery and our nature and our environment provide, then their interests are really actually quite aligned. And so bringing them together to push for reform and so on of ecosystem services, that would change the economics of agriculture.
Sure.
Which might help with then reviving that industry as well.
So Leah, what do you think are the next steps? How do we start making some progress?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is, to Stephen's point, just collaboration. I think the idea that agriculture provides ecosystem services or societal benefits is not new. And, farmers and ranchers and community groups doing agriculture understand this and have very deep connections to their land and care a lot about their production, but also the broad societal implications of how they manage their land. That's very much part of the ethos. And then at UHERO with colleagues like Clay, and others, we've worked with ranchers and farmers and community groups to quantify and express some of these ecosystem services. So the research is also there. But if you look at the focus of a lot of environmental policy and conservation conversations, tend to focus on Malka biodiverse forests that are so important for many reasons, including groundwater recharge, biodiversity, et cetera, as well as Mackay kind of marine areas. And those are super important, but we've kind of left out these middle lands as part of the conversation. And I think the fires really point to the perils of not having a more holistic, interconnected view of natural resource management, which is much more in line with a native Hawaiian worldview, which would not try to leave out a giant chunk of land, right? So I think we have the opportunity now to think about, like Stephen was saying, how do we bring together communities working on these issues so that we have better land care in these areas that are so critical to our well-being and economy.
Stephen, Leah, Kim, and Clay, thanks so much for being here. I'm so grateful for your work and insights. And thank you for watching this UHERO Focus discussion. We hope you'll read the blog at the link in the caption and support our research at uhero.hawaii.edu. Mahalo and aloha.